I am honored and really humbled to do this duty. I would like to recognize Her Excellency Ms. Boemo Sekuma, the SADC-PF Secretary General on call. Today we have a keynote speaker, Honorable Tito Mbuyeni, former Minister of Finance of the Republic of South Africa and former Governor of the Reserve Bank of South Africa. Distinguished members of the Committee of Central Bank Governors of SADC member states, Mr. Danielle Greenberg, the legal drafter for the SADC Model Law on Public Financial Management. Let me also recognize members of the Technical Working Group for SADC Model Law on Public Financial Management. And I'd like to recognize myself for being here too. SADC citizens following proceedings on various social media platforms. You also recognize members of the media. We can't do this without you. A very warm welcome to this important consultative meeting. I would like to pause at this stage and just take a moment for us to reflect on the agenda of today and perhaps request countries to just quickly introduce themselves that are on call. We can show that by a show of hand, or we just allow countries to just recognize themselves, maybe through the alphabetical order of our countries. We'll start with Angola. So we expect to have Angola on the call, Botswana, Democratic Republic of Congo, Eswatini, Lesotho, Madagascar, Malawi, Mauritius, Mozambique, Namibia, Seychelles, South Africa, Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Welcome to the call, members. And at this point, I would like now to go into the next agenda item, which is the welcome address by Her Excellency Secretary General of PF, Ms. Boemo Sekuma. Over to you, Madam.
Thank you very much, Madam Facilitator. Let me stand on the protocol that has already been established and begin by recognizing you all at this meeting, in particular, our keynote speaker, the Honorable Tito Mbuyeni. Thank you very much for honoring us at this particular meeting. The credentials have already been stated. Allow me to just stand on the protocol that has been established. Your Excellencies, Central Bank Governors, and representatives of central banks, distinguished participants, it's with a unique sense of pleasure that I welcome the Committee of Central Bank Governors of the SADC member states, as well as representatives from central banks to this landmark consultative session organized under the auspices of the SADC Parliamentary Forum. Thank you for carving time out of your busy schedules to attend this event, especially as we are aware that central banks of the SADC are actively working for the SADC member states to climb back the steep economic slope in the trail of COVID-19 pandemic. Distinguished participants, for those of you who are interacting with the SADC Parliamentary Forum for the first time, I wish to say a few words about the SADC Parliamentary Forum. The SADC Parliamentary Forum is a parliamentary arm of the SADC institutional framework and has a clear vision to act as a flag bearer of democratization and socio-economic development for Southern Africa. In this regard, it is mandated to adopt model laws which stand as guiding legislative benchmarks for the SADC member parliaments, whilst they advance the social and economic agenda at national level. I wish to emphasize that model lawmaking is a proper legislative process at regional level. Since model laws are adopted by parliamentarians from the SADC member states, who are themselves democratically elected through universal suffrage. Although model laws are non-binding, they have a high standard of persuasive authority. Already, we have concrete legislative examples of how model laws that have been developed by the SADC Parliamentary Forum have helped to support and shape the drafting of domestic legislation, especially in the field of HIV and AIDS, sexual reproductive health and rights, child marriages, and elections, which are flagship themes dealt with by model laws under the SADC Parliamentary Forum. We are thus elated to make advancements on public financial management, which is a theme that directly affects economic growth, gross domestic product, the budget deficit, and other economic variables, which are best known to bankers of the central bank. Without the regulation of public financial management, it would be difficult for the SADC region to find its way out of the economic impasse left in the post-pandemic period. And whilst the region was already beset with economic turmoil after the subprime and Eurozone crisis affected financial flows towards the region in the last decade, we believe that this is an important engagement for us to involve you as our stakeholders. Distinguished participants, since the SADC Parliamentary Forum has already consulted with stakeholders in the non-banking sector, including SADC ministries of finance, anti-money laundering and CFT agencies, prosecutors, and the police, as well as judicial officers and magistrates, it was thus necessary to consult with representatives of central banks in view of completing the circle of stakeholders involved in the financial landscape. Distinguished participant, the SADC Parliamentary Forum firmly believes that central banks are directly concerned with public financial management. The SADC Parliamentary Forum is cognizant that the financial landscape is divided between the banking and non-banking sector, and that banking business is very dependent on the state of the economy. Colleagues, distinguished participants, central banks are at the center stage of determinations regarding the price stability, the repo rate, monetary policy, the issue of banknotes, inflation, to cite but a few themes of concern. In addition, central banks are also bestowed with a mandate to license commercial banks, and in this regard, they determine prudential ratios related to borrowing and mortgages. Furthermore, central banks also manage credit information of banking consumers and regulate the confidentiality of the banking center. We fully appreciate the central banks also holds the deposit accounts of government and is generally regarded as the main banker of government funds, as well as parastatal bodies. It goes without saying that central banks constitute a pillar for the economic health of every nation. Colleagues, it is for this reason that the forum is including you to take part in the PFM policy concerns of ministries of finance, and part of its concerns central banks, which are vested with the sacrosanct independence under the law. The forum pays tribute to this independence, which for decades has contributed to the stability of the SADC economies and is ensured that our geographical region remains a global player at the financial and economic level. Today, we kindly expect that you advise us on the provisions of the model law from the perspective of central bank policy. we are mindful that public financial management has certain linkages with central bank policy, especially concerning the issue of new type of currencies, such as cryptocurrencies, and the consideration of the debt ceiling. You are thus kindly requested to consider all provisions of the model law as bankers. But additionally, you may wish to focus on Part 7 on government borrowing and the debt ceiling, and Part 11 on the issue of cryptocurrencies. Honorable colleagues, you are encouraged to engage openly and frankly with the legal drafter and the rapporteurs on the appropriateness of the provisions of the model law and advise accordingly. Your Excellencies, central bank governors and representatives of central banks, distinguished participants, we are all well aware that the independence of the central bank also means that the central bank does not interfere with the executive on the enactment of public financial laws and regulations. Still, we believe that central banks may have a role in domestication of the SADC model law on public financial management when consultations are undertaken thereon by the ministries of finance and relevant departments. We believe that as representatives of banks, you may thus voice out best banking practices at regional and international level as espoused by the public financial management model law, and help us advocate for their domestication through progressive legislation to be enacted in parliaments. Honorable colleagues, there will thus be ample occasion for yourselves to submit progress reports to any committee of parliament, including that at the regional level of the Regional Model Laws Parliamentary Oversight Committee, which will help us identify areas of improvement as far as banking law is concerned within the context of public financial management. As I conclude, the Forum firmly believes in the fundamental role played by yourselves, not only across SADC, but around the world. The central bank of every country represents a noble icon of monetary and financial stability, which shines by its independence and fairness in handling financial and economic issues that pertain to banking business. You also represent the coffers of the state, as already mentioned, and we hope that in taking part in this process, it'll also help you fully partake in ensuring that the PFM frameworks of our countries are solid. In this respect, allow me to conclude by indicating that as you contribute to a large extent to democratization and socio-economic development, we shall course fully with the objective of the forum and that of organizations such as the African Union, the African Development Bank. Together, we can hope for a better Africa that responds to the Sustainable Development Goals and the Africa Agenda 2063. And thank you, Madam Moderator, and I wish you a fruitful deliberation.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for reiterating why we are here today and providing us with context on why this model law is critical, in particular through the central bank driving an independent role and representing banks to ensure that they have the right framework to drive our economy in the SADC region. At this point, participants, I would like to go back into our agenda, and it's time to have our keynote speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, it is such an honor and a great pleasure for me to introduce the keynote speaker, Honorable Tito Mbuweni, who is known to most of you and who is going to share with us his thoughts on SADC model law to ensure that SADC national parliaments are enabled to conduct the legislative, the budgetary oversight functions for public financial management. Our Speaker, Honorable Tito Titus Mbuyeni, is currently the Regional Advisor for Goldman Sachs, is the Chairman of Accelerated Property Fund, among several other commitments within the private sector and the academia. He is also the former Minister of Finance of the Republic of South Africa from October 9, 2018 until 2021. Honorable Mbuyeni was also a Minister of Finance of Labor from May 1994 up to 1998. Prior to his appointment as Minister of Labor, Honorable Mbuyeni was Deputy Head of Department of Economic Policy in the African National Congress, ANC. He also represented ANC on several domestic and international platforms. He was the 8th governor of the South African Reserve Bank from 1999 to 2009. He joined the South African Reserve Bank in July 1998 as an advisor to the governor. Honorable Mbuyeni obtained a Bachelor of Arts honors equivalent degree in Economics and Political Science from National University of Lesotho in 1985. In 1987, he obtained Masters of Arts degree in Development Economics from the University of East Anglia in England. Honorable Mbuyeni is also honorary professor at Wits and Stellenbosch University. He has been awarded a number of honorary doctorates, a total of 5. He is currently the chairperson of the Africa Center for Economic Transformation, a think to-do tank based in Accra, Ghana. It is much an honor to welcome you, Honorable Tito Mbuyeni. Sir, let me allow you to deliver your key message.
Good morning, ma'am, and good morning, honorable members and former colleagues who are here. I must start off with a typical African story, an apology that you don't have the text of my submission. The invitation came rather late for me to have a formal presentation. But nevertheless, let's get on with the business of the day. Let me outline my thoughts. Although he did not ask me to speak about the central bank model law, as the central banker, I have to, because that's very important in a sense, showing the direction that we should be going. And secondly, I'll make comments, obviously, about the Public Finance Management Act. When I was governor of the South African Reserve Bank, I spent a huge amount of time and energy mobilizing the SADC region to adopt a model central bank law. And this entailed traveling throughout the SADC region, going to meet ministers of finance in their offices to discuss this model central bank law. At the core of the central bank law are the basic functions of central banks, which Madam Secretary General has outlined. But at the core of the functions of the central bank, 1, banker to the government, 2, banker to the private banks, registrar of banks and supervisor, managing the payment system in the country, and for SADC in particular, the importance of creating a common payment system, regional payment system, and obviously, at the end of the day, managing the maybe bond and capital markets in the country. But when everything else is said, monetary policy is the central function of a central bank. And the independence of a central bank rests on the ability of the central bank to manage monetary policy without the interference of the government. Now, one of the key issues which have been bedeviling the SADC region has been the manner in which central bank governors are appointed and removed. A recent example has been that in Zambia, where the president just decided to remove the governor unprocedurally. Now, one of the things we tried to do in the central bank model law was to make it difficult, one, to appoint a governor of a central bank, and secondly, to remove the governor. That is one of the central pillars of the independence of central banks. That independence means that the governor and colleagues do not have all the time to be seen to be towing the government line. They must be seen to be towing the line that's in the interest of the country. And it might not necessarily be in the interest of the current government, but in the interest of the country. So a president of a country, for example, cannot phone the central bank governor and instruct them to reduce interest rates or to do whatever. So we suggested in the model central bank law that the appointment process must be open and transparent. The removal process must be through the establishment of a proper board that must investigate the transgressions, if any, that the central bank governor has committed, and make recommendations to a parliamentary committee, which will then write a report to the president, to make it very, very difficult for a president to just remove a central bank governor like that. And of course, our idea was that if we had a common central bank law in which central bank independence was embedded, an independent, we will then begin to move the SADC region convergence. And as you know, we've been working with the Central Committee of Central Bank Governors for the macroeconomic convergence in SADC so that we can move towards a common monetary region. And this has been a struggle, but we have to continue working in that regard. I thought I should just say that about the central banks so that that could act in a sense as a backdrop to how we approach public finance management. I think that the effort that you are engaged in to develop a common public finance management law is a laudable one. And it could not have come at the correct time. We need first to understand, and as a parliamentary forum, you know this, but we first need to understand very strongly that any law that's passed by parliament has its origin in the political approach of the political leadership. If the political leadership is indeed determined to see a progressive public finance management act, we are going to have that in place. But if they are not, and by the political leadership, I mean from president, prime minister, and the cabinet, if they are not, then we might be as well be wasting our time. Because A Public Finance Management Act, at the end of the day, must be the political expression of the direction which the leadership wants to take out the countries. And at the core of it is prudent financial management. What do I mean by that? By prudent financial management, I mean collection of revenue, which must be based on a fair tax system, a tax system which makes the citizen to feel that they have an obligation to contribute to. And if the citizen feels that the tax system is in their favor, then they'll be willing to pay the tax. But if they feel that the tax that they pay goes to corruption, then they'll be unwilling to pay. The third component of what we should be talking about is a public finance management system, which, as I said, the political leadership is committed to, which must channel public funds where they're supposed to be channeled, the purpose for which they've been collected. And I think if we have that understanding at the political level, then it becomes very easy to draft the law to establish a national treasury, and we already have that in all countries, to establish within the national treasury a number of functions, in particular, debt management, which is very, very important in most of our countries. The issue about public finance management is easy because those are the allocation of funds to different departments. The budget office, which must take care of managing the budgetary process. And as I mentioned before, the debt management function, which is very important in our situation. But then there are other components of the public finance management, which most government departments don't like. In fact, most ministers don't like. Because the Treasury Department, in law, has to issue Treasury instructions from time to time. And all government departments and ministers have to comply with the Treasury instructions as given. And most ministers don't like it because they feel that the Minister of Finance has too much power through the Treasury instructions. Let me give a simple example. Treasury instructions say no government department can buy a car for a minister that's more than a C20 Mercedes-Benz. Most ministers won't like it because they want to drive in a BMW 720, whatever it is. But once the Treasury instruction has been issued, it has to be complied with. And failure to comply with that Treasury instruction leads to the Auditor General making a finding against that department and the minister concerned. That's the part that makes the Minister of Finance the most unpopular person because of the Treasury instructions, which must derive their power from the public finance management law. It's very, very important that we relate the powers of the National Treasury to the work of the Auditor General, because the Auditor General eventually has to audit whether the public finances have been properly utilized. There's an issue, of course, as I mentioned, around debt management, that the Public Finance Management Act must make it very clear that, that the National Treasury will issue bonds or treasury bills every week in order to manage the debt position of the government. Now, and this comes to what Madam Secretary General was saying. There's a huge argument out there that the central banks must purchase government bonds directly as part of financing the government. I don't agree with that. I think that kind of direct government financing by central banks is very dangerous what should happen is that the national treasuries, empowered by the Public Finance Management Act, must issue bonds into the market. That is the primary bond into the market. Then the central bank, if it so wishes, right, can purchase as well those bonds in the secondary market, not in the primary market. And I think that's where we must manage the relationship between the central bank and the treasuries. Because the dangers we've seen in the past is where the central bank, for example, in Zimbabwe, where the central bank directly finances the government. And we know what then happens. It begins even to affect the currency market and the functioning of the market. So in conclusion, Madam Chair, I can say with confidence that if we can follow some of the structural requirements of a very serious public finance management system, we can really succeed. And we should make it very clear as well, I think, in our public management systems, that we stand very firmly against corruption, very firmly against corruption, because corruption eats into all that money that our laws are trying to manage. So side by side with a good Public Finance Management Act must be a very strong anti-corruption legislation that then will be mutually reinforcing for the benefit of the citizens of SADC. With those few words, I'm willing to take any questions if needs be, but thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Honorable Tito Mbuyeni, for an enlightening message highlighting the critical need for the central bank to be prudent. I would like participants to give him a round of applause through online by clapping our hands online or through the screen icons. The Honorable Mbuyeni has shared his experience as a governor of central bank, which is core to driving prudent financial management in our economies. And he's also reiterating that this SADC modern law couldn't have come at a better time because it's quite critical that countries are aligned in terms of how they manage financial management and utilizing the monetary policy as a tool to drive the frameworks that are critical for the banks to deliver important products for the citizens of the SADC region and our economies to go forward. Honorable, you have highlighted also the need for anti-corruption in our economies as the important tool for us to utilize and as a principle, as a discipline for every country to ensure that we can't manage without curbing the corruption. I think you also highlighted a critical point around debt management, which is a challenge across the region, and the need for the central bank to work in a coordinated way with the treasuries and injecting bonds into the market for people to participate, for companies to participate and drive the economy forward. With that, we're grateful for sharing your experience in many folds, and we thank you. If we're not online, we would have a presentation of flowers or something, or water or drinks, but I take it that we have already presented that in spirit. Thank you. Madam Secretary General, I don't know whether you have a comment before we move on to the next item on the agenda, maybe to thank our keynote. I know you've already welcomed him.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Mine is just to express profound appreciation for the insights and for the practical manner in which examples were given to drive us to embrace this particular model law. Sir, I cannot thank you enough. We sincerely appreciate your input and look forward to an article of sorts that will continue to penetrate the knowledge that is required in the region. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. At this point, we go back to our agenda, and it's time to show a video clip to just provide further context as to why we are here and what we are trying to drive with the SADC modern law and what our participation as committee members we should be focusing on to actually deliberate on issues that can take this forward. Over to you, ICT.
This is not about a campaign against multinationals just blankly. We would like to see clean businesses who come here, pay their taxes when they work with us. The idea of reporting all their profit in a small headquarters where there are only 2 or 3 people working there and overlooking the entire operation, which is 60-70% of it is happening in this continent, we would like that to stop.
Curtail abusive transfer pricing, for example, trade misinvoicing, for example. There's a lot of work that remains to be done.
We must indeed achieve the objective of stopping the bleeding, of retaining these resources on the continent, which are illicitly flowing out of the continent.
These scenes are not so dissimilar to one that happens every day across the African continent. A businessman goes into a bank and makes a transfer of funds to an offshore company. Little questions are asked and millions are funneled out of the country electronically in a matter of minutes to a territory where little or no tax is accrued. This scenario is also surprisingly legal. A senior government minister collaborates with a mineral company executive to stash money and profits earned illegally in a foreign bank. A woman gives $5,000 to a man in the hopes to get her whole family across the border illegally. This is a human trafficker. He deposits the money in an overseas bank where it is cleaned and legitimized. All these are examples of illicit financial flows, or IFFs. Money leaving the continent, being funneled into international, global, already developed capitals and depriving African national economies of vital liquidity and resources. The campaign to stem IFFs, or previously termed capital flight, is by no means a new phenomenon and has recently received a boost by the revelation of the Panama Papers, an unprecedented leak of over 11 million files detailing wealthy individuals and numerous multinationals exploiting secretive offshore tax regimes has elevated the issues of illicit flows to the forefront of the global agenda and media scrutiny. The establishment of the high-level panel represented a watershed and new strategy to combat the illicit flows.
All started on a Sunday in Malawi. We were preparing for the opening of the African Ministers of Finance, Planning and Economic Development Conference in 2010. The room was full. We were really surprised with the response. And those who attended, they said, no, this has to go to the ministerial proper the following day. And we had a 2-hour discussion on it. And African Ministers of Finance, in their wisdom, they said, no, this is a development issue that is too important for the continent. We cannot allow this continent, the poor part of the world, to subsidize the rich part.
I sometimes refer to it as being like a hydra with many heads.
And a strange hydra, when you cut some heads, by the time you get to the seventh head, the first one has regrown. It's so dynamic, it keeps on changing shape and form. So we have to be resolved to the fact that we will always be chasing, finding out new ways of illicit financial flow and trying to deal with them. That's the first thing.
GFI analyzes illicit financial flows, not only out of Africa, but out of other parts of the world as well. We did a study of illicit money going out of Africa. We were asked by UNECA to come and discuss it. We did so. This is going back 5 or 6 years now. UNECA was frankly fascinated with our analysis that the commercial component of illicit financial flows is bigger than the corrupt component of illicit financial flows, because quite honestly, the media had been for years enjoying its criticism of Africa for the amount of corrupt money that is going out. So we came along and said, yes, corruption's a problem, but the biggest part of this is commercial.
According to GFI, these are the 3 clear definitions of IFF, as seen before earlier: corruption, criminal, and the commercial aspect. The estimated 50 to 80 billion US dollars that the African continent loses annually in illicit flows is about double that what the continent receives in ODA, or official development assistance. Moreover, based on the methodology of the Economic Commission for Africa, abusive transfer pricing and misinvoicing, the underreporting of amounts produced and profits made are another major source of commercial illicit funds lost forever.
When we then presented our report to the African heads of state and government, they adopted the report in full, adopted the recommendations that we had made, and then decided as African heads of state and government to follow up on the implementation of what had been the recommendations, which had then been adopted as decisions of the AU summit.
There has been a confluence of forces that have really given this a boost. And also, as you know very well, the birth of this was looking for how the continent can finance itself. And one of the immediate low-hanging fruits was the issue of illicit financial flows out of Africa. So I think it's firstly, therefore, leadership, secondly, circumstance, and thirdly, the strategy brought to this by the ECA.
So it's been an exciting work, and the whole purpose is to promote African development. And how do you promote it? There has to be resources. It's resource mobilization. And in that regard, what are the obstacles to resource mobilization? And one of the obstacles is illicit financial flows from the continent.
There is really nowhere else on the continent where there is a plug-in for policy and legislative shifts that we need to make on the continent to defend our outflows, other than currently the high-level panel. And they're doing a tremendous job because they've gone from beyond the report and letting it gather dust in somebody's office, but also looking at the systemic work that needs to be done, work with regards to policy and policy shifts, both at the Ministry of Finance level, as well as bringing in civil society and regional organizations to make the necessary policy shifts that we require. It's good work that they do.
Even before the Panama Papers, they have managed to elevate the issue of international financial flows, at least, or illicit financial flows from Africa, at least, into an international issue. It's a global challenge also. So they anticipated the Panama Papers. Perhaps they'll be similar in future, but already the work of the panel has already put this into the fore, has already elevated this into a global issue, a global challenge, something requiring global action.
Illicit flows have steadily increased over the years in scale and magnitude, and fundamentally undermine our ability on the continent to achieve our sustainable development goals, impede transparency, and risk further increasing inequality and poverty. The campaign to stem IFFs is now galvanized under a wider context, incorporating an array of actors from civil society, tax and governance advocates, and government and parliamentarians.
We wanted it on the global agenda. It is now on the global agenda. So there are many people who are part of this campaign to stop the continent bleeding of these resources. So it's governments, it's civil society, it's business, it's everybody.
Our role we see as bringing the interests of citizens on the table to ensure that the design of policies that will ultimately curtail illicit financial flows and ensure domestic resource mobilization are policies that are not also at the same time leading to increased inequality and having a situation where it's already the poor that are already carrying the burden that are going to suffer out of that. And for that to happen, you need to have civil society organizations in the room to create that critical mass of actors to be able to again, demand that the politicians and the governments actually fulfill their commitments, honor their commitments in terms of what they said they are planning to do to curb illicit financial flows.
Firstly, do you even know that there's IFFs? And if you do, what does that mean to you as a political party? In election campaigns, in parties that are in parliament, because we just say MPs, some come from ruling parties, some from opposition. Those that are in ruling parties, how are you influencing your own ruling party in terms of IFF? But more so, because parliamentarians get a budget for constituencies, are you taking this as an issue at constituency level, where you are saying in terms of mobilization, how do I take this message and explain it to an ordinary African? I mean, Panama Papers came. For Africa, we say they came, they are gone. For most African communities, it has meant nothing. People don't even know what that is. So we are saying at APNIFT, it is your role as an MP to take this message to that lower level, because these are the people that vote and keep governments afloat. If they are not empowered to know what is going on, they are never going to hold governments accountable.
Accountability is also in need of another key building block to fight illicit flows: capacity. Capacity building of appropriate institutions across the continent is key to improving skills and enforcing financial retention.
We begin to see that capacity challenges or the lack of capacity is a critical issue for combating illicit financial flows and stopping the bleeding. In particular, one area where African countries have big problem is actually implementing the legislations and the laws that they have for money laundering and for corruption and for all kinds of activities, illegal outflow of funds. And so we're working very hard to strengthen these institutions so that they can become more effective in dealing with these issues, and they become better coordinated in terms of what they do.
A clear metric on the success of tracking illicit flows is also its subsequent retrieval. Headway has now been made in a number of countries, generating repatriation of funds and the curtailment of aggressive tax avoidance regimes.
But we need even improvements to track it better. Better accounting and international accounting standards, better capacity with customs officials, better capacity in drawing agreements and another thing. I mean, even just identifying or tracking will take some effort.
Uganda recently won an international court case against a British oil company, and as a result of that case, gathered $423 million in income that they would have lost did they not have a capital gains tax policy and law in Uganda. Many African countries do not have that. And because Uganda had that law, they were able to go to international arbitration, win the case, and now have that income.
The cumulative effect of strengthening financial architecture, challenging banking secrecy, and reforming common tax orthodoxy reduces outflows and critically increases income on the continent. As the fight to stem illicit flows continues, the policy and legislative shifts being implemented by the panel will inevitably need to adapt to future innovative more clandestine methods of outflows, preempting a drive to shift not only the legal structures, but also an overall moral offensive on IFFs and their consequences.
You know for a fact that basically everybody in the world is going to disapprove. It might be legal, but if it's immoral, and people understand what that immorality means in practical terms. But secondly, I think there's much greater commitment among governments throughout the world that where legislation doesn't exist, it must be passed. Where it exists, it must be enforced. That you need all of these agreements and benchmarks, standards, and all that to ensure that you have both you can have moral motivation. Please act correctly, but you must also have the law on your side to say those who don't act correctly, then the law can act against them. So that you see, even the definition of what's illicit in terms of the law, as people understand the loopholes and so on, and the impact, the negative impact of these illicit flows in terms of the quality of the lives of many, many people.
Thank you very much, ICT, for showing that video, which is actually very scary, that $50 to $80 million of Africa's money is lost through commercial illicit funds. At the same time, Africa is facing the challenge in terms of how it could finance itself. While we do have these revenue leakages through illicit financial flows, mainly caused by transfer pricing, we've also heard through the videos that the challenges is that we also don't have the capacity or capability to understand the magnitude of the problem and also how to track it. Before we call upon our legal drafter, I just thought I should just give that as a context, but it will be for our legal drafter to give us more in terms of why we are here and why there is need for this common law and common framework that we have also picked up from the video, that it is critical to enable the Parliament to do its duties through the guidance of the common law. The next agenda item, we are going to have a presentation of the SADC model law by Mr. Danielle Greenberg, the legal drafter. Allow me to share a background on who Danielle Greenberg is. Mr. Greenberg is a barrister specializing in legislation and the legislative processes. He is currently served as a counsel for domestic legislation at House of Commons. He is also currently serves as a general editor, Westlaw UK, Thomson Reuters. Mr. Danielle Greenberg has a law degree from Cambridge University in England. He has over 30 years experience in legislative drafting and machinery of government. Mr. Greenberg has drafted legislation as set out in the list of many things in his CV that could be accessible. He also edits 2 legal dictionaries, an international legal journal. Mr. Danielle Greenberg has worked with governments and parliaments in the UK, in Albania, Wales, Falk Islands, Isle of Man, Gibraltar, Myanmar, Malaysia, Nigeria, Northern Ireland, Solomon Islands, South Georgia, Sri Lanka, and many other countries on the production of legislation and on legislative development processes. Mr. Greenberg has also got an extensive experience of training and teaching legislative drafting skills, including intra-government and external consultation processes. He writes on legislation and machinery of government issues. And furthermore, Mr. Greenberg has served as Parliamentary Counsel at the UK from 1991 to 2010. And from 2010 to August 2016, he combined part-time consultancy as Parliamentary Counsel at Bewin Leighton Paisner LLP with a part-time legal advisory role in the Office of the Speaker Council and at House of Commons. From 2016, he was appointed as Counsel of Domestic Legislation at House of Commons. Furthermore, Mr. Greenberg is the General Editor of Westlaw UK, Anointed Statutes, and Insights Encyclopedia, and the editor on legislation / judiciary dictionary, Jowy's Dictionary of English Law, and the editor-in-chief of Statute Law Review. He has also published Laying Down the Law, Sweet and Maxwell in 2011, and is co-author of Legislating for Wales, University of Wales Press, and published in 2018. Mr. Greenberg is a contributing consultant, editor to the Oxford English Dictionary. He is also an accomplished legal researcher, among other things. Mr. Greenberg, you're welcome to the meeting, and the floor is yours to take us through the deliberations and the presentation of the SADC modern law.
Distinguished facilitator, I thank you for your introductory remarks. Honorable Madam Secretary General of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, Honorable Keynote Speaker, distinguished and honorable delegates all, and if I may pick up on remarks of you, distinguished facilitator, and of Her Excellency the Secretary General, I also extend a welcome to the citizenry of the SADC region who are following us today either live through social media streaming or who will follow us later in catch-up services. The citizens of the SADC regional states are particularly welcome because this is your law. This law must work for you. You must feel engaged by it and feel ownership of it if it is to achieve the results that were so graphically adumbrated for us by the honorable and distinguished keynote speaker a few moments ago. Distinguished facilitator, I will shortly, in accordance with your injunctions, share my screen and take distinguished delegates through some core provisions of the model law. But before I do that, I wish to make two preliminary observations. First, I observe that, as will be familiar to all who deal as distinguished delegates do with legislation on a daily basis, the preparation of the the model law has necessarily involved a balancing of different desiderata, different and conflicting desiderata. I do not wish to labour the point in present distinguished company, but let me simply observe that this model law has to combine a simplicity of approach in order to be readable and accessible to everyone who has a stake in public financial management, which is actually everyone. But it has to combine that simplicity of structure with an adequacy of accuracy and certainty in what is a very complicated professional and technical regime. I do not need to expound before distinguished delegates today the professional complexities of the banking system, the central banking system, and the public financial management system as a whole. And you must be satisfied that those technical complexities are provided for sufficiently on the face of the model law and under mechanisms underneath the model law. And you must be satisfied that that is achieved in a way that reflects the professional challenges faced by the central banking components of each SADC member state. So we have to balance that simplicity and that accuracy, and in the same way we have to balance a clarity of expression and accessibility of language, a natural language usage, a plain language usage, against that same requirement for technical sufficiency and accuracy. We have to balance a statement of clear principles along the lines that we heard, both from the honourable and distinguished keynote speaker and also from speakers in the video clip that we just heard. We have to balance that degree of accessibility against an effective implementation strategy. As the honourable and distinguished keynote speaker said, it is not enough for us to have pious and aspirational expressions of objectives. They must be enforceable in clear and certain ways. And I will draw attention shortly to some specific aspects of the model law which aim to achieve that balance. And finally, we have to balance certainty with flexibility. You, distinguished delegates, as operators of the central banking system, need to know with certainty what is expected of you and what you can expect of other components of the financial management structures within your states. But you also need to know that those structures can develop, have the flexibility to develop and emerge alongside changes in the real world. And nowhere perhaps is that more clearly apparent than in part 12 of the model law dealing with cryptocurrencies. Honourable Madam Facilitator, you have mentioned already the technical working group, which has been so vital to the production of the development of this model law. And it was at the insistence of that technical working group, Madam Facilitator, that the provisions on crypto assets and cryptocurrencies were expanded to provide additional detail and clarity. And yet, how can we provide a snapshot of how crypto assets challenge the public financial management systems today without becoming instantly obsolete in 3 weeks' time, never mind 3 months' time or 3 years' time, as the crypto asset environment changes beneath our eyes all the time. For this reason, the model law draws upon the principles drawn from the London School of Economics and Political Science Institute of Global Affairs, basic principles for the regulation of cryptocurrency, fourth draft. But at the same time, it provides the flexibility expressly for those principles to be adapted and developed in accordance with real-world changes, and indeed with changes in the attitude of central banks and others to the regulation, classification, evaluation, and management of crypto assets and cryptocurrencies in the forthcoming years. My second preliminary observation is that it has been necessary to reflect the fact that each of the SADC member states has a unique constitutional and other legislative position in relation to public financial management. Each state has a different degree of specificity in its constitution and its other legislative arrangements in relation to matters with which the model law deals. And the domestication process will therefore be one as much of contextualization as it is of transposition. And in a number of places in the text of the model law, footnotes draw attention to specific needs to contextualize within the circumstances of each jurisdiction to avoid unnecessary overlap and to avoid conflict between the provisions of the model law and the provisions of the Constitution and other legislative arrangements of that jurisdiction. Distinguished Madam Facilitator, with those preliminary remarks, I now move to sharing my screen and to take distinguished delegates through some specific aspects of the model law, for which purpose I would now ask the Secretariat to confirm that delegates are able to see my screen.
Yes, Dr. Greenberg, we can see your screen. Thank you.
Part 2 of the model law sets out the aims and objectives, not merely, I stress, as part of the preamble, but as operative legislative provisions which the courts will apply and other readers will apply as glosses on all the obligations and other provisions of the model law. And in doing so, it draws fundamental importance, it ascribes fundamental importance to accountability, transparency, independence, and modernity in relation to the raising of revenue, but also, as distinguished honorable keynote speaker mentioned, the expenditure of public money, the tracking of the use of public resources more generally, accounting for receipts and expenditure, and the envelope of parliamentary oversight. Measurability was mentioned in the clip that we heard a few moments ago. Clause 10 provides a duty on all public officials to aim to optimize revenue and expenditure, to prevent unauthorized expenditure, to improve sustainability, and to ensure accountability and oversight are effective. And in doing that, the executive is mandated to operate a scheme designed to specify measurable benchmarks for testing success in achieving those outcomes, and for those benchmarks to inform the reporting and recording functions under the Act. Clause 11 articulates the public financial management principles of transparency, accountability and participation with formal and meaningful opportunities for the public, including all sectors of the public, to engage in the budget and other financial management processes. The oversight principle, which relates to other bodies with regulatory functions, including, of course, primarily the central banks represented here today, and the responsibility principle, so that we are not simply appealing to the morality which the video clip mentioned a few moments ago, but we are supporting that with effective responsibility in a number of ways to which I will draw attention shortly. And those responsibility and other principles build upon the public financial management values, which are articulated in Clause 12 as integrity, independence, impartiality, equity, professionalism, accountability, and responsiveness. Finally, Part 2 alludes to the contextualization to which I referred a moment ago, and makes the model law directly linking to the provisions of the Constitution and other legislative arrangements of each SADC member state. Part 3 identifies the primary public financial management authorities, including the Finance Minister, the Finance Secretary as the permanent head of the Civil Secretariat in relation to Finance Ministry functions, which are set out in Clause 16 in some detail, again balancing that overarching principle with a technical detail that reflects the technical functions involved, including the inspection function upon which so much hinges. The ministry's functions, again, are adumbrated and articulated, as are the requirements for accounting officers within each unit of the public financial sector. Clause, the Auditor General is dealt with in more detail in a later part and is signposted in Clause 23. Part 4 deals with the public funds to which attention was drawn before. The consolidated fund maintained by government at the central bank, with payments in and out being regulated in the ordinary way. Other accounts, including retention accounts, trading accounts, and debt servicing accounts are mentioned, and we have been asked at a previous consultative forum to say more about special funds, which we propose to do. Part 5 deals with the supply and appropriation process in the ordinary way through appropriations of fact and appropriations in aid. Part 6 expands on the parliamentary control underneath the parliamentary engagement principle, under which Parliament uses the full range of mechanisms available for overseeing and controlling public financial management process. And in order to avoid being prescriptive, which the model law must not do in order to allow contextualization, express mention is made of the standing orders and other arrangements of each Parliament and committee to ensure that it, in its domestication process, it contextualizes within its own context. The Auditor General's independence, appointment, and situation and functions, including review functions, are discussed. The status of the Auditor General as independent is provided for expressly, and at an earlier consultative forum, we were asked to expand the independence of the Auditor General by removing any possibility of regulations to be made by ministers, which we will do, although of course at the cost of opening the question of who will provide those additional subordinate regulations that are necessary to achieve the flexibility to which I referred earlier before. The Public Accounts Committee's role is set out again with a certain amount of detail, but always subject to the standing orders and other procedures of Parliament in each jurisdiction. Auditor General reports, which were mentioned a moment ago, are coupled with a requirement to maintain a complaints portal for members of the public to feed in, and these complaints mechanisms are directly linked to the whistleblowing protection, which distinguished and honourable delegates here today will recognise instantly as being of the essence if there is to be enforceability of the anti-corruption and other mechanisms at the heart of the public financial management process. Part 7 deals with the national budget in the ordinary way with parliamentary control through the annual appropriation, with flexibility being provided for by environment. The budget process is linked not only to the standard estimates and debate, but to some specific accompanying documents which the model law requires in order to meet objectives identified earlier: departmental objectives statement, a sustainable fiscal policy statement, a sustainable development goals statement, an international commitment and project statement, an equality and diversity statement to emphasize that equality and diversity sit at the heart of public financial management, and past year and future year implication statements and multi-year budget projections, together with the public debt statement, to which I will return shortly. And those statements as well link into the necessary flexibility through environment, but also through national adjustment budgets, in-year budget reports, delayed budgets and pre-budget expenditure, as well as withholding of appropriated funds and guarding unauthorized expenditure, to ensure that whenever flexibility within the regime is required, it does not dilute completely or undermine the overall parliamentary strategy and oversight function on which the model law is predicated. Part 8 deals expressly with public debt, classifying it in the widest ways, all financial liabilities, including potential and contingent financial liabilities. The debt management strategy and committees link into a borrowing power authority and borrowing arrangements. They refer to the widest identification of government securities through securities agents, identified and recorded in a register, and they mention specifically other borrowing, including on-lending, but also guarantees and indemnities of the widest kind. The budget statement, to which I said I would return, is provided for in clause 82, and that statement, accompanied by a public debt schedule, is required to form a key component of the budget accompanying documents. Her Excellency, Madam Secretary General, drew attention in her remarks to the debt ceiling. Here it is in clauses 84 forward, but again, it is not a prescription to individual jurisdictions, which would be inappropriate. It is a structure of enhanced excess reports and scrutiny that applies when a ceiling is met, again to provide flexibility, autonomy, and independence within the overall oversight envelope. Part 9 deals with procurement and use of resources on a broad basis through procurement regulations, again acknowledging the need to depart from regulations in emergency without departing from the underlying principles or diluting the oversight. Part 10 deals with public accounts, and as distinguished and esteemed delegates would expect, this is done in accordance with best modern international accounting practice on a resource account basis, not a cash accounting basis, in order to provide a true and fair view and to conform to generally accepted accounting practice. It is also, for the same reason, done on a whole of government account basis as articulated in clause 101. The scrutiny is through the Auditor General in the ordinary way, and additional accounts are provided for in the ordinary way. Part 11, as I said before, deals with enforceability through the creation of a public financial misconduct offence and a misuse of public funds offence in each case with the penalties left to be supplied by the transposing and domesticating jurisdiction in a proportionate way that fits with the criminal and penal policies of each jurisdiction. Maladministration is dealt with through identification in reports of the Auditor General, the Public Accounts Committees, or other investigations or inquiries, and in accordance with the separation of powers, it therefore leads not to criminality, but to certain disqualification powers overseen by Parliament. Part 12 I have alluded to already, being based on principles of engagement, classification, consumer and investor protection, cryptography and technology and constancy, but subject to the flexibility provided by a strategy, by guidance and by regulations. Finally, with your permission, Madam Distinguished Madam Facilitator, I draw attention to the flexibility achieved by supplementary regulations and guidance, but always subject to the scrutiny and control of the Parliament and legislative authorities in each jurisdiction. I hope that has adumbrated sufficiently for distinguished and honourable delegates the core provisions of the model law, and I look forward to hearing comments and indeed scrutinizing and benefiting from and implementing written submissions which delegates, colleagues may be kind enough to make in the future. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Greenberg, for presenting the SADC model law on public financial management draft, which is meant to address some of the root causes whereby Parliament as an institution is unable to achieve its functions in public financial management efficiently, which is leading to lack of prudential financial planning, lack of oversight in the procurement processes of the state, and possible wastage of public funds through corrupt practice. This draft is meant to ask for the committee to deliberate and contribute towards what has been presented, and we will have Mr. Greenberg to respond to the participants in terms of the comments or questions regarding what he has presented. As a reminder, we are able to participate in 3 languages, in English, in French, in Portuguese, and therefore at this point, we would like to request the participants to raise their hands in terms of the comments they have or the questions they have, so that we open the floor for the plenary deliberation. ICT will also help with the participants' contributions in case we are not able to pick up the raise of hands from our side. The floor is open for comments and deliberation and any intervention for consideration in finalizing this common law, this model of law on public financial management. ICT, let me know if there's any comments that are coming in other formats that may be not visible to us. Perhaps without seeing the raise of hands, if I can just call upon participants by countries to either comment or if there's no comment, so that we have progress in our deliberation. Any comments from Angola? I will then check if there's any comments from Botswana or contributions. Or any observations. I'll then move on to Democratic Republic of Congo to check if there's any comments or contributions. I see a hand. Oh no, there's no hand. Any comments from Eswatini?
Yes, madam.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Yes, there is a comment from Eswatini.
Thank you.
Eswatini appreciates the comprehensive presentation by Mr. Greenberg. It was clear. We'll probably be forwarding some written comments later. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And we look forward to receiving the written contributions. It's very welcome, and Mr. Greenberg will be able to respond accordingly. Any comments from Lesotho?
Thank you so much, Madam Program Director, and let me align myself to the protocol. And I also wish to thank Mr. Greenberg for the presentation. I have a couple of comments and a question, and most of my comments are related to public debt management and the issue of cryptocurrencies. Under public debt management, I think one of the areas where we have been struggling a lot, and we are in most states in the SADC, is the contingent liabilities. There have been considerable amount of risks emanating from that side, and the framework has been very weak in terms of how we then manage that, because the central government could be prudential, but then if elsewhere the state-owned enterprises are not as prudent, they eventually we squeeze the already a little fiscal space. So I think I want to appreciate that, because if we are to domesticate that, I think we'll benefit a lot. I just got a bit confused under debt management. There's a mention of a debt ceiling in the draft law. And I think in the concept note, there was a mention of 60%, and then there was a mention of 50%. That got me a bit confused, because I was checking that against the SADC macroeconomic convergence framework, just for consistency, so that once the model law is domesticated, it is then consistent with what is already happening elsewhere. So that would be that. I think we just need to be sure of the consistency. I think it would be very important. On the cryptocurrencies, or before the cryptocurrencies, one last question, rather comment. In relation to on land, it's another good piece of law to make it explicit. I just wish, as we domesticate and do legal reforms, we'll also make it as explicit in the Central Bank Act, just so that the two talk to each other and there are no loopholes. Cryptocurrencies, I think it's an excellent piece of work. That is the future, really. That is where eventually we are going to go. So I think having that provision is quite good in terms of looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions and comments. I'll hand over to Mr. Greenberg to respond.
Grateful to the distinguished delegate from Eswatini for his comments and look forward very much to reading written submissions from Eswatini. Grateful also to the distinguished delegate from Lesotho for his insightful comments. Contingent liability, I agree. We do refer to it, as I pointed out in my brief exposition. If he or other distinguished colleagues have specific suggestions for how we might enhance the mechanisms for embracing contingent liability within the public debt management structure, we will look at those with particular interest. But I echo respectfully what he said, that it is recognition that contingent liabilities fall within the public debt envelope that is vital to the principle of the model law. His remarks on the consistency of policy in relation to the ceiling are noted, and we will take those away and check that at a secretariat level. The question of on-lending, again, if there are additional technicalities that should be reflected, then we will be very delighted to do that. And finally, I respectfully welcome his endorsement of the cryptocurrency mechanisms that are adumbrated in the bill with an element of flexibility. Madam Facilitator, I offer those observations. I also, with your permission, remark that a parliamentary emergency has just arisen here in Westminster, which requires a certain amount of my attention. I will therefore now be listening so far as possible to comments from delegates. I will not be able to listen to all and respond to all. I will certainly, the learned rapporteur will be taking a careful note of everything that delegates say. And if I miss a particular contribution or I'm not able to respond to it, we will certainly follow this up in the rapporteur's notes and in written submissions kindly made by distinguished and honourable delegates. I apologise very much to the meeting, and I'm grateful for your indulgence in the light of the parliamentary emergency that has arisen.
And thank you, Mr. Greenberg, and thank you for the responses to our distinguished colleagues from Eswatini and Lesotho. I will then ask participants that have questions or comments to send them through. But in the meantime, I will also continue with our checking with the countries online in terms of their comments. Any comments from Madagascar?
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everyone. The Central Bank of Madagascar, I would like to pose one question with regard to the next steps that we have to go through to adopt the model law before we adopt it fully at the national level. I would like to know which steps are we going through before we implement fully the model law at the national level? I thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Madagascar. And we'd like to then move on to Malawi.
Thanks very much, Madam Moderator. I hope I can be heard well. Just a few comments. Firstly, of course, to appreciate Mr. Greenberg for putting together the model law. I think following from the keynote address by Honorable Tito Mboweni, I think model laws really have helped. We are looking at central bank model law as well as, I think, banking legislation. These have gone a long way to help member states in SADC to actually update or improve their local legislation with the lessons learned from the model law. So this, my apologies, this is a step in the right direction, and also congratulations to the SADC-PF for hosting, initiating this exercise. You also have our appreciation from the Reserve Bank of Malawi. I note from the concept, that I think some of the challenges in terms of public financial management in the region have to do with enforcement. I was reading, I think, 3-4 bullet points in the concept in terms of the gaps that are existing, which I think is very, very true. When I look at even a local context, I see that the law could be there, but perhaps it's the enforcement, the sanctions regime. Sometimes that is really a problem. And therefore, in that regard, I wanted to appreciate in clauses, for example, I think 1.9 and 1.10, where the model law provides for offenses. I wanted to appreciate whether that's a modern way of drafting. Where the drafter has created an offense in one section, and in the second section, he's actually providing defenses to the person who has committed offenses in the first subsection, for example. For me, I would drop leading defenses to somebody who, for example, knowingly or recklessly misused public funds. I think that's clause 109, if not 110, if I'm not mistaken. So perhaps it's something that the drafter may wish to speak to a little later, or indeed Secretariat, but it's something that I wanted. And I link this to the fact that enforcement is one of the major gaps which this exercise has revealed in terms of public financial management in our region. Otherwise, I also would like to commit that we will submit written submissions in a week or so, because there are one or two other professionals that have shown interest to read the model law within the bank here, the Reserve Bank of Malawi, and make their own comments. Otherwise, I thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, our distinguished participant from Malawi, for highlighting the major gaps that you foresee in your country, and committing to send the regional submission, and also to appreciate further the clauses that are dealing with the references to offenses and defenses. I take it that has been taken on board for Mr. Greenberg to respond to that, if at all he's already left the meeting. Thank you.
But my colleague from Malawi, Madam Moderator, also has an additional comment to make. Agnes Center is raising her hand. She's my colleague here from Reserve Bank of Malawi. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Madam Santala.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. Indeed, just to agree with what my boss there has said, I want to confirm that indeed we will be sending through written submissions, because this meeting has come at a time whereby we have just concluded reviewing our Public Finance Management Act. We now have a bill which we're ready to take to Parliament. But listening through to what has been presented this morning, we can only appreciate the drive and would like to go back to the drawing board to see where we can draw synergies from. That said, since the presenter is not here, but I wanted to understand under the general definition section where we are discussing public authority, it makes mention of the fact that it's someone who is exercising functions of a public nature. I know it was the subject of debate right here in Malawi. What does it mean to exercise the function of a public nature? I looked at the model law, maybe I missed it, apologies. I didn't seem to get any definition or any guidance as to what we are referring to insofar as the functions of a public nature are concerned. I also looked at the model law. I noted that whether it's by design or not, but it hasn't defined a statutory body, because in our Public Finance Management Act, it was also a hot issue whereby we have a provision which exempts a central bank as being defined as such. And it's a bone of contention, because you find that some provisions, they relate to a statutory body and would want to be exempted as a central bank. I've looked at the model law, it hasn't defined a statutory body. So I wanted to tap from the wisdom of the presenter as to whether a statutory body should include a central bank, such that everything which is provided for under a Public Finance Management Act must also apply mutatis mutandis or no force to a central bank. I know there are pros and cons for that. And finally, from me, there's part 6, which talks about parliamentary control. I also wanted to understand the requirement for public authorities to disclose commitments entered into. Madam Moderator, what does that mean? Any threshold? Anything else? Anything that one can think of? I also wanted to understand the thinking behind the model law. With those few remarks, I wish to submit, and thank you so much for this session. It's been an eye-opener. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Santala. Could I ask it, or Mr. Greenberg is online, the comments on Malawi from both distinguished guests? Or the rapporteur working with you? You guide me.
Madam Facilitator, I'm back briefly. I did not hear the end of the Malawi, the distinguished delegate from Malawi. I wonder if the rapporteur can just briefly outline the point, then I can respond to it.
Over to you, rapporteur.
Madam Moderator, I can quickly repeat if that is okay.
Okay, we can.
That would be exceptionally kind.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. The first question related to the issue of public nature. I noted in the definition section that we have defined a public authority to mean someone who is exercising functions of a public nature. And I noted the absence of a definition to that effect. And I recalled the debate which I once had. It's a hot issue whereby we were not clear as to what really amounts to functions of a public nature. So I wanted to understand or to tap from your wisdom what that means and why is it that we haven't been given some sense of direction to avoid such debates. And also I noted that under the model law, we have not defined a statutory body, and I'm asking this because in our case, I mentioned that we have just reviewed the Public Finance Management Act, and one of the hot issues was whether in the definition of a statutory body, we should include a central bank. Speaking as a central banker, I was saying, no, we must exempt a central bank from that definition. And I noted that even in the draft, the bill which we have, they have defined a statutory body to exclude a central bank. Why that is important is because when you look at the obligations which the Public Finance Management Act imposes on a statutory body, if a central bank is not exempted, they will apply on all fours to a central bank. So I wanted also to get some guidance if that's a move in the right direction in view of what we have heard earlier on. And finally, I did pose the question on the issue of disclosures. I noted that under Part 6, there is a requirement to disclose commitments entered into. I wanted to understand what that means, any other commitment regardless of threshold, so that as we conclude our review process on our Public Finance Management Bill, we also take that on board. Those were my 3 questions. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Madam Santala. In addition, Mr. Greenberg, the other colleague from Malawi did request a clarity or appreciation of the clauses that are referencing offenses and defenses. And the colleague is online if they wanted to elaborate on that earlier comments, but it was in reference to the clause where you refer to offenses and defenses.
Now it's just clauses, I think 1.9 and 1.10, where in the first clause, we are creating an offense, and then in the second sub-clause, we are providing defenses. I was saying with challenges of enforcement, which I think is what you found as the one of the major problems. Why do you want to give defenses on a silver platter to someone who has committed an offense in the first subsection? Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you.
Yeah, if I may take that last point first, with great respect to both delegates who've been indulgent enough to repeat their points. So the simple answer to that is that you've got a choice. You can either create an offense with a mental component, or you can make it effectively strict liability. If it has a mental component, knowingly, willfully, intentionally, that is what creates your main evidential difficulties. It is very difficult to show, to prove in a court that somebody intended to misuse public funds. So the opening of the offense is effectively strict liability. However, you can't actually have genuine strict liability for an offense of culpability of this kind. The court simply won't enforce it. So what you have to do is you have to bring it back in the form of a defense and say, if you can show that you took reasonable steps to avoid the commission of the offense, then you're okay. If you can show that it would have been unreasonable to expect you to know that this was misconduct or misuse, then you're okay. So it puts the boot on the right foot, and it ensures it maximizes enforceability within a structure of equity and fairness. I hope that gives some comfort to the distinguished delegate from Malawi in relation to that.
Yes, you have. Thank you very much.
If I may now revert to the questions raised by other distinguished delegate from Malawi, for which I am enormously grateful. And I fear I don't have as good answers for her points as I would like to have, because she has raised three extremely difficult, as she knows, indeed as she says, she's raised three extremely difficult questions that do not have simple answers. She is right that we've defined public authority by reference to functions of a public nature. She's right that that is fairly open. The danger, of course, of trying to tie it down any further is you end up being circular, because in this context, you end up saying public nature means functions that are funded from public funds, and you come right full circle in a circular definition that doesn't help anybody. So we have agonized about this, and based on the in-country discussions that she recalls having had recently on this very matter, if she would like to very kindly make any written submissions in due course on thoughts of how we could drill down further into public nature, then I will be very, very happy to look at that. I'll be very grateful for that. I have to say that some common law jurisdictions have so far managed to deal with public nature functions as a concept here, and they've developed a broad jurisprudence, partly by reference to funding, but also by reference to beneficiaries and classes of beneficiary, not by way of a firm definition, but by way of a jurisprudential approach to the concept of public nature. I respectfully agree with her remarks in relation to public authority, statutory body, and central banks. And in relation to her observations on part 6, I think the issue in relation to commitments and the breadth of commitments is again a contextualization issue, that we have to reflect such a broad range of different jurisdictional contexts. So I think we have to use some pretty open language of that kind, and that explains our starting point. But again, if she has some thoughts on how it should be narrowed, I will be enormously grateful and will look at those thoughts very carefully. So, albeit conscious that I have not managed to give her, indeed to purport to give her a clear answer, I think that may be about as good as I can do at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Greenberg. In addition, Malawi has also committed to send comments in writing.
It's very kind.
Moving on, I'm inviting any comments from Mauritius. Any comments from Mozambique or observations? I'll move on to invite any comments from Namibia or observations. And we now got Seychelles online if they have any comments or observations or clarities. I'll move on to check if we have our distinguished guests from South Africa with comments and any clarities, observations. And then move on to Tanzania. Any guests from Tanzania that needs to comment or make observations? And distinguished guests from Zambia, do you have any comments, observations, or need to send documents or through any comments through writing?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Just to thank the SADC-PF for convening this session. It's been quite enlightening. And also to thank Dr. Greenberg for that presentation. From Zambia, we will commit to submit some comments within the course of the week in writing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished guests from Zambia, and your commitment to send comments in writing. And finally, distinguished guests from Zimbabwe, do we have any comments or clarities required or observations?
Thank you, Madam Facilitator. And we wish to thank the SADC Parliamentary Forum for this initiative. And we also wish to thank the draftsman, Mr. Greenberg. At this juncture, Madam Chair, we have found the text of the draft model law to be in order. It is quite clear and flowing, and it espouses the principles of transparency and accountability. And for now, Madam Chair, we do not have any substantive comments on the text itself. Should we find anything worth commenting on, we'll send through our comments. Thank you, Madam Facilitator.
Thank you, our distinguished guests from Zimbabwe. And thank you, distinguished guests, for your comments and clarities and your commitment to send Mr. Greenberg your comments in writing. We welcome them. At this point, we'd like to thank Mr. Greenberg for facilitating this session and presenting the model law and giving the responses that you required. And he will also be following through anything that you'll be sending in writing. Mr. Greenberg, we're honored to have you and for your presentation. And thank you very much for your time and commitment to with the commitment to other things that you've been able to juggle the two. It is really appreciated.
Madam Facilitator, I thank you, and I thank distinguished delegates.
We're coming towards the end of our meeting, and at this point, I would like to call upon Her Excellency, the Secretary General, Ms. Boyamo Sekuma, to now have the stage and sum up the events of the day before we close.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I'm sorry that my camera will not be able to go on. The lighting, it's already dark where I am, so it's nighttime. So I'm in a room which doesn't have good lighting, so I apologize for that. And let me begin by really appreciating the collaboration and the interventions that have been made by our central governors today. I wish to also place on record our appreciation for Dr. Greenberg for his collaboration over the time, for his keen interest, and for really taking with strides the drafting process of the model law, which really ultimately will motivate our member states, reinforce and consolidate oversight of SADC national parliaments and other stakeholders in the process of the PFM occurring at domestic level. I'd like to profoundly thank my sister, Rutang, for at a very short time coming on board and giving us this excellent facilitation that she has provided. Her depth and appreciation of issues of PFM is clearly been demonstrated in the skill that she used to drive this process. I'd like to also thank my colleagues who are always working in the background for ensuring that all the dots are really, punctuated and ensuring that we have a seamless process at all times. The technical working group for their guidance always, and hope that this will continue beyond the adoption process. This brings me to the question that was asked earlier. What should we expect and what is going to happen going forward? We have had several consultations, as I alluded in my, setting the tone at the beginning of the session. These consultations took on board several stakeholders. We are concluding these consultations in April with a joint committee of parliamentarians or joint committees of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, who will go through the model law following the amendments, synthesizing that will be done by the technical working group and the final drafting by Dr. Greenberg in April at the end of the month. They will go through the model law paragraph by paragraph, section by section, and make their input. Once that is done, they will recommend that the model law be presented to the policy-making organ of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, which is the plenary assembly session, which will be hosted in July in Malawi. Once the plenary assembly has adopted the model law, it will then be out and circulated to all stakeholders for consideration and domestication. We are looking forward to this process because it is imperative to help us bolster parliamentary oversight, to strengthen our accountability systems, and avoid wastage, among others, including corruption that we spoke about today. The model law will evidently address the concerns that you are raising in your interventions around debt ceilings, on member states, around the issues related to corruption that was raised by our keynote speaker earlier on, and it should provide reasons and remedial measures in this respect, among others. And we are looking forward to you engaging with us beyond just this session through your contributions that you will be sending through to us, and also giving us other innovative ways that are sustainable that we can integrate at the post-adoption stage that we will go through after July this year. So with these few words, I would like to say thank you very much for your brilliant, interventions, and we're looking forward to you letting other stakeholders know about this model law, that it is a normative standard that is ready for domestication, that these instruments that have been developed will augur very well to relieve the complexities that we face in relation to implementing our PFM systems. I thank you, Madam Moderator, and good morning to all of you. Have a great morning to all of you. And for those in a different part of the world, good evening.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Secretary General. And with that, there is no further deliberation or any items of our agenda today. And officially, we adjourn this meeting. Thank you for all your participation. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon.
Thank you.